A lot's gone on in the last couple of weeks. We had to demolish this gateway. I had to demolish these garden steps. I've had 7 skips. I had 8 tons of the wrong aggregate delivered. I've had a cement mixer with too much cement. But we've made enormous progress, and we now have a concrete slab poured in our kitchen, where only a few days ago it was looking like this. So in today's video I'm going to be explaining to you exactly what's been going on, with a particular emphasis on the underfloor heating system that I'm going to be installing, which by the way is going to be a polypipe water-based system. And crucially, the builders have now left, so from this point on I'm on my own. So with the knock-through complete, I was in a race against time to remove the old kitchen so as not to hold up the builders with the excavation of the floor. The granite had been glued to the kitchen units with grit fill and the sink with silicone, so I set about cutting through the grit fill with my multi-tool. It was important to keep the granite intact and to dismantle the kitchen as carefully as possible, as I'd sold the kitchen for £950 on Facebook Marketplace. I've had this multi-tool for a number of years now, but it kept overheating. I think the brushes probably need replacing. So I ran out screw fix and bought this one from Erbauer. I thought £84.99 for a variable speed, brushless multi-tool with a little case of accessories. Seemed like a decent deal. But also I had to buy something quick because I needed to get the kitchen out. The new tool was a vast improvement on the old, and I was able to cut through the remaining grit fill and remarkably managed to remove all the granite without breaking it. Even the section around the sink, apart from one of the splashbacks that unexpectedly fell off the wall and snapped off the corner. When we were taking out this supporting wall last week, we got quite a lot of dust from the kitchen into the rest of the house. You just can't stop it getting in. So I was quite anxious to make sure this didn't happen when we were excavating the floor this week. So I set about installing some partitions in our lounge, both in the doorway into it and this main sort of walk through here, using this 3x2 and some sort of 12mm shuttering ply, which I sort of decided was the cheapest, most cost-effective material to use. I did screw this particular section to the roof just to make it easier to line everything up. This plasterboard below is steel, so I used these Fisher Duo Power 8x40 fixings. But where I could, I just wedged the stud work in place. Obviously screwed the shuttering ply to it, and then use expanding foam to fill up any gaps, because it's really important that there weren't any gaps for that dust to get through. And this new expanding foam gun that I bought, which was a recommendation of Sam on my Discord forum, has been fantastic. You may have seen my video a few years ago with my original gun, which I think was an Everbuild. And this one is non-stick, and it's quite a crucial difference because with that Everbuild, you had to clean it out almost immediately after using it, certainly a few days later. And even after cleaning it out with the acetone spray, I often found it stuck, the ball bearing inside it stuck the next time I tried to use it. And you end up wasting so much foam. Whereas this, being non-stick, is much, much better because you don't have to clean the gun out as often. You can leave the gun grade foam on for a much longer period of time. And this little control knob here gives you really good control over the volume of foam coming out of the gun. Fill here, you can slow it right down to a dribble. Why am I boarding up so much of this room, you might wonder? Well, partly because I want to remove this chimney. And I know this chimney isn't load bearing and doesn't continue into the bathroom above because I laid a floor on top of it back in 2014. And the reason I want to remove this is because the manifolds for the underfloor heating will hopefully be on this wall, which removes the need for me to have to snake all the underfloor heating pipes around the room to where the central heating flow and return pipes are in this cupboard. The plan instead is to send an extension of these flow and return pipes across the floor to where the manifolds will be for the underfloor heating. And to do that, I'm going to have to cut up the floor to get across the room. I also had to rip out the cupboard I built a few years ago that housed our tumble dryer and washing machine. And the pipework for the washing machine went in a diagonal right across the kitchen to this point here. As this included the waste, and considering how badly it was done, it's a miracle it never got blocked. But it did need capping off before the boys could work on the floor. I put a couple of push-fit stop ends onto the plastic pipe that the plumbers had installed back in 2010. I've never used this stuff before It's remarkably easy. I'm still not sure whether I like it long term, but just remember, if you're using these fittings, don't make the mistake I made initially with this, as some of you might have noticed, of not using the inserts that you have to insert into the end of the plastic pipe to support it before you insert it into the T or stop end and make it fast. And if you saw my vid recently where I installed the dog shower with hot and cold water, the plumbing for this is now in jeopardy, given we may not have the sink in this position in the new kitchen. What I have done is made use of those 15mm plastic pipes to install a temporary cold water feed to our porch so I can reinstall the washing machine and dishwasher to tide us over until we have the new kitchen. Very important, as this could be a while. I improvised a temporary waste with some spare fittings I had lying around and managed to route the grey water into the drain with a water pump hose. And so we're on to the excavation part of this project, where I had to basically dig up the floor in preparation for the underfloor heating system. Now, there's a really good reason why people don't often attempt this in old period properties like this, because it's so much harder to excavate and more expensive to excavate all of this material than it would be in a new build, where you can simply plan the different layers as part of the construction. Unless you're installing something like New Heat's Low Pro or Polypipe's overlay system, you're going to have to pull out a serious amount of earth from your house. In my case, 400mm, and I'll come on to exactly why in a minute. One of my builders, Gaz, started using my McAllister concrete breaker to dig up the floor. Thanks again to Gosforth Handyman's Andy Mack for recommending this to me. It's been a beast on this job. By the end of the day, most of the top layer was up and carted off to the skips in wheelbarrows, but we still had a lot to excavate, and so I suggested we hire a micro digger to dig out the subsoil, and my other builder, Danny, then suggested we hire a 1-ton skip loading dumper to cart the soil from the house and into the skip, because once you've shut the door on the skip, it's very difficult to lift the wheelbarrow to empty it into the skip. This meant demolishing our garden steps and also the gateway into the garden, so the dumper could fit through, although I plan to remove both of these at some point as part of the re-landscaping of the garden. And I've got to say, demolishing that arch was great fun. Excavating 400mm of floor was producing a lot of bricks, soil and rubble. Not to mention some other unwanted guests like these roots. And we couldn't have managed without this mechanisation with the micro digger and dumper. But the costs were beginning to mount up at a frightening rate. So why take out 400mm of thickness, which after all is a lot? Well, in our case, we've got 150mm Type 1 MOT, which is sat directly on a compacted soil base. You saw all those roots we pulled out. We wanted to make sure we had a really good base to start building off, and we compacted that with an Evolution whacker plate I hired locally. We had a near disaster because on instruction of my builder I ordered what I thought were scalpings, which turned out to be planings. Some people even say these are one and the same, which you can't use as an internal sub-base because they're basically recycled scrapings off the roads, bitumen based and therefore degradable over time and susceptible to slumping, quite apart from absolutely stinking of tar. After a sleepless night, I contacted the company that had dumped 8 cubic metres of them in the drive, and they agreed to take them back for 50 quid and replace with Type 1 MOT. We'll come on to the benefits of that Grab Lorry in a bit. We then spread out 10mm of building sand as a protective blinding layer for the damp-proof membrane. A reinforcing mesh was then suspended off the floor with these mesh men, and then 100mm of concrete followed by 100mm of PIR, which leaves me 50mm, if my memory serves me correct, for the screed, which obviously contains the underfloor heating. Now, if you're planning a similar project to me, you want to think about two issues here. Firstly, a basic requirement to comply with building regs, but secondly, a more practical issue as to what you're trying to achieve for your own development. I had to try and work out whether what I'm doing with this floor is renovating a thermal element or replacing a thermal element. As defined in this building control guidance note, thanks to the guys on Discord for finding this for me, I'll place a link in the description below the vid. The reason this is relevant under the building regs themselves, again, also I'll put a link to that in the description, is that new elements have to comply with a lower U value of 0.18, whereas for existing elements undergoing renovation, there's a higher limiting value of 0.25. Now the point here is these are limiting values and you want to do everything you can to come in as far below these values as possible. because you've got a one-off chance to make a massive difference here to the thermal footprint of your house. And there's another point here, correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, if you can significantly outperform or undercut the U values on a thermal element, like for example this floor, it gives you a bit of leeway if there's another thermal element that you're either renovating or adding to your building project where you don't meet the target U values. You can offset one against the other to achieve compliance. So that's another good reason to go large on your floor insulation. So I went online this morning to the Ecotherm website, which has a U value calculator. You need to tell it the PA ratio, which is the exposed external perimeter wall of the room divided by the square meterage that you're insulating. And it's quite helpful because you can put in different thicknesses of PIR to see what U values you can achieve. And with 100 mil PIR, I can get to a U value of 0.16, which is pretty good. And 0.02 below the threshold. And the more practical point is this floor was absolutely freezing before we started. You couldn't really walk on it without shoes on. It was unpleasant to do so. So what we're trying to do in this build is turn what was a fridge into basically a massive radiator under the floor. But the only difference with this radiator is whereas normal radiators, you're putting about 55-60 degrees of heat through them, with underfloor, the temperature that you have to pump through those pipes is a lot less, in the 40s. And that's where you get your efficiency from a massive slab that then starts radiating heat around the house. Anyway, we'll come on to that in later videos. Now, there's another important point to make here, which Simon pointed out on my community tab. Thank you for that, Simon. And the point is, for a traditionally constructed building like this, if you use limecrete in your new floor slab, you can get dispensation from Part L, which is the part of the building regulations that talks about heat loss and U values. And his point is you should be managing moisture levels properly in a building like this, which a damp-proof membrane like I've installed won't. His point is you should be putting in a geotextile membrane, which as far as I can tell is a bit like weed matting, 150 mil of Glapor, another geotextile membrane, underfloor heating on a geogrid, and finally 110 millimeter limecrete slab. Now, during the lifetime of this video, I'm going to get a lot of criticism for doing it the way I have, rather like I have when I did a video on insulating the internal walls of our house upstairs. My reply to that was that I'm trying to create a house which is habitable to live in. It was Tyrolean rendered on the outside on the 1970s. When we moved in, it had polystyrene back wallpaper everywhere, so it couldn't breathe particularly well. And in fact, down here, there was a polythene damp-proof membrane, albeit a not very good one, underneath the entire floor that we hacked out. So my new crimes are no worse than those committed previously. So the concrete I ordered was a Gen 3 mix, which should come up to 20 newtons of strength, meaning it should be able to take about 20 tons. I'm probably going to be applying a 7-floor screed, one of the most thermally efficient screeds for underfloor heating. And I'm sorry, it's just a decision I've made. I'm not going with breathable materials, because I'm trying to create the most thermally efficient house I can within my budget. Speaking of budget, I just want to pass on the benefit of something I've learned on this project. This is skip number 7, and on about skip number 5, the skip driver kindly pointed out that if I'd used a Grab hire lorry, I could have saved myself a ton of money. Several tons, in fact. Because a Grab lorry will take about 2.5 skip loads for about 330-350 quid, whereas I've been paying for each one of these skips between 265 and 295 pounds. So if I just dumped all of the materials from the house down here, the Grab lorry would have picked it up in the same way as it did that stinking pile of planings earlier on in the week. It would have been a hell of a job carting over 4 cubic metres of concrete down to the house in wheelbarrows, so we decided to get a concrete pumping company in to pump the concrete from the mixer down the approximately 30 metres to the house. The idea is the pumping team arrive an hour or so before the concrete to bolt together their pipes and get ready. At £340 plus VAT for 2.5 hours and then £75 per hour after that, you want to be as organised as you can and make sure the concrete doesn't arrive a minute too late. We did stray into the 3rd hour, partly because the concrete arrived half an hour later than scheduled, and so it ended up costing £500 on top of the £993 for the concrete. More on that in a minute. The droning noise you can hear is a concrete vibrating poker, which basically vibrates the concrete to remove air bubbles that then provide consistency and strength to the concrete. As the concrete was pumped out, Danny and Gaz raked and spread it evenly across the room whilst trailing around the poker, and then, unfortunately after I'd switched off for time lapse and had to head out for the afternoon, troweled it smooth, or certainly as smooth as it needs to be for the next PIR layer, with that easy float you saw them using just now. And I've treaded in a lot of mud in this worsening weather in case you were wondering what all the stuff was all over the floor. So we need to have a bit of a clean up. There was one final stress, and that was realising that we had over 2 cubic metres too much concrete in the mixer, which of course they wouldn't take back with them. We'd ordered a 6 metre load. Don't really know why this happened. It could have been when I was looking at those ecotherm calculations, we've got a floor area of about 43 square metres. I think we were operating on more than 46, 47. God knows why we didn't check that. But just a message to you to double, triple check how much materials you use for a job like this. Luckily, we had this trench that I dug for a new square bay window foundation that we could lose most of it. And then the farmer took some as well, and the remainder went in the skip. But this is all stuff I paid for, which is really annoying. So that's it for today. I hope you found that interesting. After 3 days of video editing, I can't wait to get on with the next stage now. I need to demolish that chimney. I've got a little bit of upgrading to do to our temporary kitchen just to make it a bit more livable. And I've got the kitchen walls to strip off back to the brickwork. Important point there, look out for my YouTube short pointing out why you don't dot and dab a wall like this without any vapor barrier or insulation behind, as my builders did back in 2010 when I got home one day to find out they dot and dabbed this whole wall without asking me. You can see the mold forming behind this, and I think this is going to be a really useful observation for all of you lot if you're planning your own projects. Stay tuned. In a week or so's time, I'll be issuing another update. And in the meantime, details, links to everything I've talked about today will be in the description below this video, which of course you can access on your smartphone by clicking on the More button and on your PC by clicking the Show More button. I've given you some of the costings. I'll keep a tally of all the costings of this project so that I can summarise at the end just how much I've let myself in for. Final point to make, if you're new to my channel, it would mean so much to me to have you subscribe. You can do that by clicking on the link here, and don't forget to click the bell notification icon so you get notified of all my future uploads. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.